which I decided at the last minute to throw in today because there's some really good stuff in there. There's a lot of opportunity for interaction here. So you will see that the Q&A mode is open. There is should be a little hand icon that's present for you that if you want to ask a question at any time, click on that Ask a Question button and it will notify me. I can activate your audio so you'll be heard by everybody in the group and ask your question or contribute a comment, whatever, so feel free to do that. In addition, you'll see the little chat bar at the bottom. It's that thin white line at the bottom to the left of the send button, the blue send button. You can type in a message there at any time, hit send, and everyone in the group will see it. So away we go. So obviously you probably all heard the news, hopefully, about the encyclical on climate change that Pope Francis put out, released kind of overnight. And I was reading through some of the media accounts and looking at some of the key aspects. Enlarge the presentation screen here. Some really he's put out in terms of values, framing, and obviously from a moral standpoint. I think it's a lesson for all of us in terms of how we can not only communicate on climate change, but also communicate on issues that are outside of the climate change environment silos and bring that into areas like education, labor unions, healthcare, things like that. So here we go. So there's the source. It's from a Reuters news piece that was put out early this morning. So the first statement, he talks about how in recent decades, warming has been accompanied by constant rise in sea level, increase in extreme weather events. And this is an important phrase. Even if the scientifically determinable cause cannot be assigned to each particular phenomenon. And what's important about that? And for those of you who have read some of what Dr. Lakoff has written, or things that I've said in workshops or online, this gets to systemic causation. He's describing the systemic causation in global climate change. And you hear conservatives all the time deny the effects of climate change because there's no scientific evidence of direct causation to any given extreme weather event. Climatologists and scientists won't look at a tornadic outbreak or an extreme hurricane and say, yes, this particular incident is a direct cause of global warming, because it's systemic. And this is critically important because here's the Pope speaking in moral terms, talking about systemic causation. So a really good lesson there. The next one, he combines two concepts when he's talking about dangers to the planet. So he talks about the effects of the present balance can only be reduced by our decisive action, and we need to reflect on our accountability before those who will have to endure the dire consequences. And what I found really interesting about that statement is he combines the two ideas. First, he combines the systemic causation in terms of the imbalance, the effects of the present imbalance, and then this responsibility to act on behalf of future generations. And I point out that the translation of the document says accountability, but I think not seeing the original Italian or knowing how to translate it, I raised the question, I wonder if responsibility in context better fits the intent and the values he expresses there. So this idea that there is this systemic causation creating an imbalance in our global climate, and it is we who have the moral responsibility to take that on behalf of future generations. Really, really great statement there. The next one is, again, very powerful, a brief statement, something that would take somebody no longer than a few seconds to say, but makes a great comment on climate change contribution to wealth disparity. And he says that we continue to tolerate that some consider themselves more human than others, as if they had been born with greater rights. And what a powerful statement, because for everyone who's followed the concepts of framing knows that conservative framing and the conservative system is based on a hierarchy, where it puts rich over poor by virtue of their implied morality for being wealthy. So to be wealthy, they must be disciplined, therefore they are moral, and they deserve their higher position in society. Well, here the Pope takes that on by saying that, we're tolerating that they consider themselves more human, as if they had been born with greater rights. And he's also evoking this idea that we have to have empathy for people, where we take responsibility for others as ourselves, as opposed to just bowing to this this false social hierarchy that puts humans above others just because they have more wealth. Great statement, and I think this could be said among a host of progressive issues, especially, of course, economic disparity. This next one was my favorite because he created a metaphor, and we should all understand and acknowledge the power of metaphor in language. And he creates this metaphor of political myopia or nearsightedness. The myopia of power politics delays the inclusion of a far-sighted environmental agenda within the overall agenda of governments. So here he's contrasting the nearsightedness of power politics with the big picture farsightedness of what governments should do in their overall agenda. And of course, what he's doing there unconsciously is evoking this idea of how short-term consequences of power politics and this idea of the moral market are completely contrary to the far-sighted, big-picture role of government to protect and empower people everywhere, no matter who they are. So I would love to see this metaphor, myopia of power politics, or nearsightedness of power politics, come up in public discourse in Wisconsin, especially when you think about the direction the budget is going, based on what the GOP is looking to do, and Walker with the budget, the nearsightedness of the budget. So political myopia, or myopia of power politics, or to say nearsightedness. Great metaphor there. So then the next one, just a couple more here, on banks, environment, and production. The first sentence is stunningly relevant and powerful. The idea that production, or what's going on in the market, is not always rational. You've heard Dr. Lakoff, others, more progressive economists, talk about the market as being irrational, and that it's subject to emotions, greed, and fear, which is exactly why we need responsible public oversight for the market. And here the Pope is tying that in with climate change and saying that it's tied to these variables that don't correspond with the real worth of quote-unquote products in the market. And basically what he's saying there is, look, the aspects of nature and the world that are being overlooked in the market, the rational market, have much greater value than money or the market itself. And that we need to start acknowledging that in our system, and reforming banks and our economic system to acknowledge the real worth of nature and the world around us, and indeed the people in it. So great, another just a home run there in terms of messaging on banks and production relative to the environment. So what I wanted us to do today is I'm going to just minimize that screen so we can come back to it later if you want. If you have any questions, feel free to chime in. But consider how these statements that the Pope has made in terms of our local issues in politics. There's clearly some stuff there that we can use in our daily letter writing or public discourse or communications with others. So, kind of an introduction there. So for the rest of the session tonight, here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at a little bit of really cool new cognitive science that I became privy to, and if you contact me by email, I'd be happy to share the link. It was a TED Talk by Donald Hoffman, who's a cognitive scientist at the University of California, Irvine, who does work completely independent of Dr. Lakoff and the others at Berkeley and Columbia who are doing this work on the cognitive unconscious. So completely different realm, but it speaks volumes to what we are all trying to do here in terms of framing. I think you'll really enjoy it and find it stunningly relevant. And again, I can send you the link to the TED Talk. It's only about 20 minutes long. Then we are going to look at the letter that I posted in the newsletter, which a friend of mine is also a UW alum and is a medical researcher, sent to state and UW leaders on the situation with the UW budget. And we're going to look at the response that a conservative business leader, who I will keep anonymous, emailed directly to us. You're going to find it fascinating in light of seeing who's online here, about framing. And we'll open it up for some response in terms of what you would say. And then we will finish with look at this survey that the Republican National Congressional Committee set out nationwide to Republicans nationwide, which I got a hold of thanks to a friend, and look at that in terms of how conservatives are using effective framing and language in surveys, not to get opinions from people, but to actually influence public opinion and drive their ideology, and see what we as progressives can learn from that in terms of surveys. And ideally, what I would like to do is put together a survey that I could put up on my website, and we could all distribute to our groups and organizations to participate in that survey and just get some responses and see how that works. So if there's any questions, again, click on the Ask a Question button, the Q&A, or just feel free to type in the chat box at any time. So basically, I will be doing a workshop up in the Wausau area for a Uniserve group on Monday. And as part of that, I'm going to open up this just a few PowerPoint slides that kind of demonstrate what we're talking about. Dr. Donald Hoffman, UC Irvine. And what he's saying is our perception or how we perceive the nature of reality is false. And this kind of gets to what framing is all about. Framing is, the science of framing is saying that most of what we process is unconscious. It influences our physical behavior in ways that we don't know. And thus it has a significant impact on what's considered consonance in public discourse. So you've all heard that before. So connect that with what Dr. Hoffman is saying, that what we perceive about the world around us is actually not the nature of reality itself. And the example that he gives is the research that he's done on the evolution of our behavior and how our brains process information. So if you consider that vision is basically neural synapses that are connected to photoreceptors at the back of the eye, that what those neural synapses are constructed to do is to carry the information that the eye takes in to the brain through those synapses. But what is new about his work is that they're discovering that what the brain actually does is it reconstructs what we see. And it reconstructs what we see based on what we have evolved to do to survive. And they're finding out that successful behaviors, adaptive behaviors, through evolution are shaped by this constructed reality. So what we see and experience in the world is reconstructed based on what is most enhancing, the best enhancement of our survival and ability to flourish as a species. But it does it in a way so that, as you see the bottom line there, it helps reconstruct our perception of reality so that it fits the world as we know it. Does that sound familiar? And there are some great examples of this that happens through vision. And some of you may be familiar with some of these, but here's just a few short ones. So for example, the figure on the left that you see, where you have the A, you see the pencil is pointing there, and the B in the separate squares, it's a cognitive illusion where we perceive that those squares are different colors. A is darker than B. When in reality, A is exactly the same shade of gray as B. And what Hoffman points out is, you can know that this is true, you can be consciously aware that it is true, yet your perception, your brain, reconstructs reality because of the tricks and hacks that we're all programmed with for survival in the world around us to still experience that cognitive trick. It's perfectly normal, it happens to everyone. So, the next one. So try to count the black dots. You know, you can chase the black dots all over the screen, just as I'm following my eye with the pencil, trying to see the black dots. But in reality, every one of those dots is white. And it is a reconstruction of reality that happens perfectly naturally that has adapted our behavior for survival at the very cognitive level. This is my favorite. So is this a moving image? Obviously not. It is static. If you stare long enough at one single image, keep your eyes perfectly still, you can view the static image. But in essence, it is a cognitive trick. Kind of cool. So what's important about this? Well, Hoffman has come up with a metaphor. Here we are back at the metaphors, to describe our perception of reality. Because otherwise we would not have a handle on reality. And I have a picture there of the Eagle Nebula, which is the birthplace of the stars, just to demonstrate reality is much more grand than we have any perception of. But he says that reality is like the desktop on our computer. It's a great metaphor. That desktop icon that we all have on our computer is our functional interface with the internal workings of the computer. We don't see everything that happens instantaneously in the computer. We interface with that icon to function in the reality of the computer. And how we perceive the world is the same way. It guides our adaptive behavior for survival and success. And what we perceive about reality is actually not the reality itself, but it's the interface. It's a great concept, and the idea that we are blind to our own blindness because we are only dealing with an interface. So you're all going, wow, Scott, that's really interesting, but how in the world does this apply to politics or messaging or framing or anything like that? Well, let's take a look at that real quick. So if our brains reconstruct our perceptions unconsciously, right, so that those perceptions fit the world as we experience it, and that's part of our evolution to guide adaptive behavior for our survival. We know that part of that process is that our brain uses existing information to fill in knowledge gaps. And where there are gaps in knowledge, our brain goes back in time to the strongest circuit, right? Think of that as the desktop interface, the unconscious interface that we are familiar with. So in politics, the conservative frame is the most dominant. It is dominant of our perception of reality. It is our most often used desktop interface. I use the documents interface all the time. And so that causes us to, as you all know, repeat and reinforce progressive messaging. So what I'm proposing that this framing does is it helps us construct a piece of reality for people to accept and understand. So that through framing, we can make and create this desktop interface for people to interact with, to understand the world in a progressive frame. And I would argue that without framing, that people will keep seeing the illusion. Even though you know that those little football-shaped things, whatever they are static, you still see them moving. And without reference of framing, for people to understand the reality, people are still going to see the illusion. And the example I have here is that job creation equals economic growth. Very simple. So that is the kind of quick and easy, maybe not so easy, but somewhat easy version of that. But again, the way that it applies to politics is critically important. So again, if you have comments, questions, thoughts of real-world application, you can do it now, or we can get to that in a bit. So I'm going to close that window. We have had some more people join on in the meantime. And just so you know, again, the Q&A mode is open, so you can do the ask a question at any time, or you can do chat button. I'll just type something in here, and then you click send, and everybody can read it. So it's a little white line at the bottom to the left of the send button. So the next thing we're going to move on to is this UW letter. And I'm going to do a little bit of enlargement here so you can read it. And just an FYI to people, if you have a question about this one, question button, because with this expanded screen, I'm unable to see the chat dialog at the bottom. So just a little background. You're all aware of the UW budget and what's going on. And I would argue that the very destructive language regarding tenure and shared governance is far more damaging than any financial cut. And what we have seen play out prior to the budget being introduced and kind of on the heels of it from the leadership at the university has been this very a market-driven message about the economic value to the university, to the state that the university represents. Kind of a very singular message. And I don't think that I need to tell all of you that in having that single-minded message, when the tenure and shared governance stuff came out, the university had really nowhere to go with the messaging because they had siloed themselves into this economic argument. And with the GOP saying, well, we're not going to cut as much. We're going to be the good guys. We're not going to cut as much as the governor. The UW found themselves kind of in a framing and messaging vacuum, so to speak. So I have some highlights here of the letter, which you can find in full in the newsletter. If you'd like to get a copy of the document, I'd be happy to email it to you. But I just want to run through some of the ideas, and feel free to chime in if you have anything to add or questions, anything like that. But the first statement that we made was this idea that the people's prosperity is directly linked to the prosperity of both public institutions, and that the ideological attacks that were going on in terms of the tenure and shared governance will systemically destroy the university and each citizen's future potential to prosper and enjoy opportunity provided by educational freedom. And the bottom line is that what this tenure and shared governance, taking it out of law, does is it politicizes truth. So the pursuit of truth is part of educational academic freedom to provide people with opportunity to prosper based on discoveries through research that is not politicized. So clearly what this is an attempt to politicize truth. And we frame that as a betrayal of public trust because what are the leaders of state and UW system doing? They're only focusing on this financial aspect primarily. There are quite a few faculty members. David Ness is one. There are others talking about academic freedom. But when you start talking about this politicization of truth, that if you have the highest political official in the state, who is the governor, who has the power to appoint his political allies to the Board of Regents that runs the university and governs the university, it is no longer a democratic institution, and it is in fact become a political body that has politicized what truth will be pursued. So very damaging, and there you see this idea that it will systemically destroy the university and the people's potential around it. So setting the frame early. We talk about how public leaders have a responsibility to protect and empower. You heard that evoked in the Pope's language on climate change. Well, here we evoke it in terms of UW, because what do these public leaders at the university say have a responsibility to do? It's to protect and empower people through knowledge, because we know that education is empowering, and to protect basic freedoms, one of which is educational freedom to pursue the truth, without being political. And then we point out, as a way to undermine the leaders who betrayed public trust, that they're neglecting that responsibility for political expedience. Again, pointing out this politicization. So the next thing we needed to do was create empathy. And create empathy with the idea that we all have a responsibility to ourselves and each other to invest in the university, because it will, again, protect and empower future generations. And what we decided to do is to say, look, the university has provided everyone with life-changing discoveries. You know, some of these very basic things that we take for granted on an everyday basis. But if it weren't for the freedom to pursue truth at the university, we wouldn't have discoveries on vitamin A and B and D and warfarin and land conservation, stem cell research, computer science, transplant surgery. I mean, the list goes on and on. The university has a resource on its website where you can go through the chronological timeline of all the amazing discoveries. And what we have a responsibility to do, all of us as a community, is to protect the public from undemocratic private rule dictated by one political figure. Again, politicization of truth. So our call to action was for public leaders to uphold their moral responsibility to protect freedom and empower the citizens with opportunity to pursue knowledge, right, outside of the politicization of truth. So gives you a good idea of how to frame this university budget and things like that. So now we get into the fun part. So here's the conservative response. I can tell you this is from a business leader. It's somebody in the Fox Valley, and I know that there are some of you on online tonight from the Fox Valley. And just check real quick here. Yeah, we have several people from the Fox Valley. I'm looking at who's on. So go ahead and expand that again. So anybody can. There's a certain that this conservative person is basically living in. Yes, it is a conservative frame, but it is part of the conservative frame that is very powerful. Is evoked by the Pope. So if anybody wants to take a stab as we look at this here, I think they get it. So the first thing this person says is that the Republican leaders were elected by the people, and the people chose to give, and this is copy verbatim, so any typos are taken directly from the email. And the people chose to give both houses a Republican majority. So I concluded that our leaders are fulfilling the wishes of the people. So just real quickly, as that being the first sentence, the person is evoking this idea of choice, which conservatives love the idea of choice. And what he is ignoring is that people make choices based on largely unconscious biases. People do not rationally choose anything. We're largely making decisions based on emotion. So, you know, to make that as a rational statement from the beginning, he is kind of yielding the moral high ground there in favor of saying, well, they're just doing what the people want. That's also assuming that the parties in power are acting rationally based on the wishes of the people. And I think we have a lot of evidence to demonstrate that that's not the case. That people are actually very much against these actions against the university. So I just found that interesting. He right away goes to the whole choice argument. But here's where he really starts evoking his kind of his key worldview, is that UW is broken. Education advocates sound familiar. Public schools are broken, et cetera, et cetera. Milwaukee schools are broken. The university's lack of cost containment appalling. He was saying that his opinion is that the lack of cost containment is appalling. Are students the customers or the faculty the customer? So anybody want to take a guess at what part of the conservative frame that is? It's the market, right? So he's evoking the idea of the market, correct? That the students are customers, or faculty are customers, and there's this cost containment, just like you would have in the family's budget or in a business. And when you're running a for-profit business, you've got to do the cost containment to make sure you meet your bottom line. Really, really interesting stuff. So then he gets to the next market-driven point, and you hear this a lot in terms of educators. You hear it in terms of K-12, higher education, this idea of that, look, if people have job security, 100% job security, then there's no incentive to perform at a high level. This is a really interesting part of the frame of economics, the conservative frame of the market here. And basically what it's saying is that it goes back to this idea that the people who succeed are the ones who are disciplined, right? And they are successful because of their discipline, therefore they are moral, so they deserve their success. The people who don't deserve their failure. When they just have more discipline, they'll succeed, right? So when he's talking about incentives, what he's saying is we should take away all those government protections, right? All those public protections, all the things that are community or collective based, because that takes away this idea of competition, which drives incentives and high performance, right? That's what he's saying in the conservative frame. And there is a way to counter that in the progressive frame. And it is this idea that, again, the public has a responsibility to protect and empower, but it also has to do with the idea that that if you take away public oversight or take away regulation through the public, it opens up the door for greed, for cheating, for political favoritism. So again, it's like you're politicizing the truth. So we can counter that frame there. The next one I found really stunning, and I hope all of you did too. And I think that this would be great to put together a list that how the UW has touched every person in the state. We had a brief one in the letter, but to just frame it in terms of the progressive frame, the frame of empathy, how we all take responsibility for each other as ourselves, for the future, etc. And then here's how we've done that, through our investment in the university. So he says, I personally have not been touched by UW's search for the truth. Part of my income taxes goes to UW, so I should expect to derive some benefit from the UW, right? So this is what we hear all the time. This is what Scott Walker says all the time. I'm going to lower your taxes. It's your money, you should really keep it. Like, he's perfectly echoing that frame. And unfortunately, if all we talk about is the economic benefit of the university to the state, not the people, but the state, then we buy into this idea that it is a cost-benefit analysis. Just driving the bottom line. So we really need to get better at communicating the frame, the larger frame, the systemic frame of how the UW is an investment that we all make in each other, and how we have the responsibility to do that. And here's what we have provided for everybody because of that. So I would welcome email or on the website posting lists of things. Just here are everyday things that the UW does, and I can put them out there on social media and everything like that. So let's move on to the last two here. And I would ask you to consider, start considering what you would say. Because I would really like to hear how you would respond to this person. Because I think our first instinct as progressives is to start talking about the facts. Again, the economic benefit of the university to the state, or the facts about tenure or shared governance, or budgetary facts or something like this. But he actually acknowledged the moral tone of our letter, which is why he responded. He was compelled to respond. So we already have him thinking in terms of moral basis here. So this is an opportunity that we can learn to stay in that moral realm with conservatives, elevate it above political, and start making an impact. So the last two are probably the most significant. They came towards the end of the letter. The first one talks about how cost is too high, and that real change is really painful. Suspecting that tenure shared governance are real obstacles to effecting meaningful change, and that transformational change requires true leadership. And I would ask you to process this as I kind of break it down. But what you see here is that the cost is too high, which means that the public is immoral, it's wasting our money. And this idea that change is really painful, and that the tenure and shared governance are obstacles to effecting meaningful change. What he's saying is that the painful change is that those immoral, undisciplined academics, those liberal academics, should not have protections of the public. That they should be competing in the market just like everybody else, and that way the so-called cream will rise to the top, and the others will just fade away, and they deserve that because they're undisciplined and immoral. And that pain, it's interesting, he says pain, that pain is justified, and it's in fact moral, because it's through that pain that they will become disciplined. Really, really critical stuff here, and he evokes the conservative frame to a T. And then the idea is that the vacant positions, right, left by the people who can't make it, by the undisciplined, by the immoral, by the people who are too liberal to work hard enough to get a job, they will just be filled by people who accept the new paradigm. In other words, the people who are now disciplined and therefore more conservative will move in, right, and life goes on. And I find the whole phrase "and life goes on" linguistically to be very much a very kind of it's his will kind of thing, almost a religious overtone to it, that life goes on, and that's the will, that's how it should be. Very interesting. So just gonna pull back that thing for a moment here. So I would definitely welcome any thoughts. I really would like to hear, what you would say, how you would respond. I mean, we're looking at a moral, two moral contrasting positions, but the conservative has inherent weaknesses in their frame, which we know is, the big one is that private prosperity depends on the public, or is not possible without the public, and that the public is critical to freedom and liberty. And so that would be the place to start, is how can we evoke that idea of private is dependent on the public to counter what the conservative says. Somebody is typing in. Give it a minute to come up here. And while the person's typing, the other aspect of that is then countering this idea of the market version of economics. And I think in the Pope's writing, that was released. Hold on a second. Okay, so here, this is interesting. So did the representative of said people campaign on all the changes they were to make? So therefore, are they truly representing the public voters? That's a fantastic question. Obviously, no, that's not the case. Mary, I'm sure you heard that up in Wausau, that was not the case. So that goes to this frame of the betrayal of trust, that they have a responsibility as public leaders to protect and empower, that our great public university is about relentless pursuit of the truth, not being political. And I would say that that is a great question to ask. And I would argue that you could make a statement that the representatives are not representing the public because they are betraying the public trust. And those specific actions did not come up in the campaign. That they were, in fact, you could say they were hidden, and that was part of the betrayal of trust. And that also goes to the idea of kind of reframing the economics that we need to value. Oh, and somebody's come up with a comment. I'll just finish my thought, Sheila, and then I'll get to you. I'll activate your thing here. There you go. Okay, Sheila, you are live. Oh. I can't hear your question, Sheila, so maybe your microphone isn't on. Or you could type it in the chat line. The chat line down below.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Oh, there you go. There she is.
Okay.
So what's your question or comment?
I can't type in the chat box. How do I do it? It isn't working.
Oh.
Sorry.
Okay. No, that's okay. Okay, so at the bottom of the screen, there's a blue send button.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to the left of that is a white, long, thin white triangle. Click in that box.
Thank you.
You are welcome. Do you want to just ask your question, or as long as you're on?
No, not now. No.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay. So this idea of reframing the market in terms of, I love how the Pope said value, the value of something other than money. And I think in terms of the university, that would be really powerful. Because we talk about income inequality and possibly even inequality of access to the resources of the university. What about talking about, our representatives are betraying our trust by only showing a love for money or valuing money when there's so much that's more important about what the UW does for all of us. So, yeah, great question. So that lends itself to, and I'm gonna make some notes of that, and I think it'd be really good to get some of that up on the web for people to kind of start messaging letters and things like that. So, okay. So, if you get any other ideas while we go on here, just feel free to chime in. It's easy, it's fun. So, I've just pulled up, I have it magnified really well so you can read it, and we can keep all these windows open. So this survey is fascinating. So it's called, I have the full copy in front of me here. So it's the truth about Ripken's survey. And here's the document. There's a letter that came with it, which is it's 2 pages long, and it says the same thing for 2 pages, which again, repeating the frame reinforces it, right? So this is an official project of the NRCC, the National Republican Congressional Committee. I want to just briefly read the first couple sentences here, because this sets the whole frame. So it's Dear Fellow American, and it comes from John Boehner, Speaker of the House. I need your immediate help to cut through the lies and misinformation about our jobs agenda being spread by Washington Democrats and their special interest allies. The left will do or say anything to obstruct our pro-growth, common sense solutions. So there is the perfect example of the conservative frame, because first of all, as well, people will reject facts that don't fit their frame, keep the frame. So cutting through the lies and misinformation. Their jobs agenda or pro-growth in terms of, as we've been talking about tonight, how the conservative frame of economics is so destructive. 2 key points here. And for all of you who are on tonight are very active in your communities. 2 phrases that I want to point out. Special interest allies, that's the first one. That's become a conservative metaphor for labor unions. Okay? People unconsciously understand special interests as labor unions, even though progressives use that term to describe the Koch brothers and big business and things like that. There's a lot of survey data that shows that the first thing that pops into people's minds when they just hear the term special interest is labor unions. So we need to be really, really careful to not repeat that metaphor. The other term is common sense solutions. And as all of you have been through workshops, you know that the conservative frame dominates what is common sense. So for us as progressives, and we see this all the time, for progressive Democrats or Democrats in general, saying, we have common sense solutions. Understand that there's no such thing as common sense progressive solutions. Because progressive ideas are not considered common sense. It's we need to start making them common sense by communicating effectively. But as of now, when we say common sense solutions, people will immediately evoke the idea of conservative types of ideas, because that's what common sense is. Perfect illustration: job creation equals economic growth. That's where I was going with that. So I want to call your attention. You can see it up on the screen, hopefully. Question number 2. This one right here. Sorry, I was trying to underline. There we go. Favor of reform that lowers income tax and business tax rates, while closing loopholes and making the tax code fairer, simpler, and geared toward creating jobs. Wow. Just to run through that real quick, I'm guessing that you all kind of get an idea of where this is going, right? But first of all, the whole sentence creates a metaphor, right? You have lowering, so decreasing, lowering. Yeah, Mary, I can make it full screen. Hold on. There we go. So there's full screen. So yeah, and I can clear my pen. There there. So okay. So lowering income taxes and tax rates, right? Closing loopholes, right? So again, closing, reducing. So lowering makes the tax code fairer, simpler, and creates more jobs, right? So you have the contrasting directions of lowering income tax is good because it does what? It relieves the burden, which will then create more jobs. So there's nothing factual in that statement. There's no data about how many jobs lowering the tax rate will or won't create. In fact, we tend to know that by reducing tax rates, it actually does nothing in terms of economic stimulus. So it runs completely counter to facts, but more importantly, as you can see, it's 100% about conservative values, that the public is immoral, that it impedes impedes private success and profit. So, what can progressives learn from this? Well, we need to ask some surveys that evoke the progressive frame of economics. So the next one that I want to jumped on me there. Scrolling. Is number 5. Do you believe that President Obama has mismanaged federal bureaucracy, allowing government agencies to become unaccountable and arrogant? I mean, talk about evoking conservative values and evoking the frame, right? If the public is immoral, of course it follows that that the government is unaccountable and arrogant, and especially under Barack Obama, who's become himself a metaphor for what conservatives view as progressive leaders, being undisciplined and kind of the liberal elite. So here we have the conservative view of economics. We have the conservative entire frame of the public. The number 6 there with the Keystone Pipeline, American energy products create jobs, hold on prices. Obviously that's also the economic frame. And then the next one that I wanted to point out is they talk about immigration. Sorry, number 10. Number 10 is the IRS. And again, 100% conservative frame. All they're doing is they're getting out their message in the guise of a mass mail survey and reinforcing it. Continue supporting House Republican efforts, Darrell Issa, to continue investigating and holding the IRS accountable for political targeting, harassment, Tea Party groups and conservative organizations. So again, this idea that the public is immoral, impeding people's freedom of speech, et cetera, et cetera. The final one that I want to point out here is number 11. 11 and 12 kind of talk about the immigration issue. But the first one is fascinating because they talk about Obama's reckless executive amnesty, right? Of course, reckless, you hear them talk about Obama's reckless all the time. But the idea that encourages more people to come here illegally, putting their lives at risk. What's really interesting about it, they're kind of trying to evoke empathy there. They're trying to evoke some aspect of empathy for the people who are trying to get into this country. And I find it really interesting that in that one sentence, you see a little glimmer of the empathy that exists in conservatives in terms of people who are trying to integrate to the United States. But what's interesting is they still say that they're coming in illegally. Right? So you have this kind of dueling frames where, okay, they're coming here illegally, so they don't deserve to come here. They're immoral. They're undisciplined because they're acting illegally. They don't deserve all the prosperity that's possible here. But they're still putting their lives at risk. So is the subtext here that they deserve their pain and suffering because they're putting their lives at risk? I pose that as a question, kind of an open-ended question, because I think that could be the subtext for this message here. They are coming here, quote unquote, illegally, and therefore that makes them undisciplined and immoral. They don't deserve the prosperity and the freedom and liberty available here, and the pain and suffering that they're experiencing is actually deserved because of their lack of discipline and morality. So, yeah, fascinating survey. The entire survey is there's also a back page, but we find the survey is based on a couple of very simple concepts. One is the idea of personal liberty and the fact that the immoral public should not, big government, shouldn't interfere with personal liberty. Right? So that's principle number one. And number two is this idea that that by shrinking the immoral public and reducing taxes and spending, that will create prosperity and greater individual liberty, both in the economic sense as well. So I have what I've done here is I have closed the phone window here. There we go. I have a couple of questions. The first one that I want to ask is, I'm going to open this up for all of y'all. So just take a few minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, you should all be able to poll, and you should actually be able to respond. It is a short answer. They're both short answer questions. And I'm going to actually turn off off my end of the audio and video and give you a few minutes to answer the questions. And there's two of them. So just a couple quick, just issue and how your perception of that issue, as we talked about before, in terms of framing, how has it been constructed to fit the dominant frame? Right? So if there's an issue you care about, right? How has the truth about that issue, the reality of that issue, been reconstructed to fit the dominant conservative frame in ways that you yourself personally think about, right? And then the follow-up is, what is a value that will construct a new perception through framing on your issue? So if you think in terms of what you saw in terms of what Pope Francis wrote, or the UW letter, or our discussion about the UW letter, or something like that, how can you construct a new perception through framing? Just very brief answer. So let's give it just a couple minutes. I will be near the screen, so if poll, just go ahead and ask a question, hit the ask a question or type it in the chat, and I'll be back with you shortly. Okay, so there's a few responses. I'll just give it a couple more minutes. Like to get as many people to put in their ideas as possible, because this is important as we start to think through the process of pivoting from the conservative to the progressive frame. And part of that is, again, this idea of constructing a new perception through framing. And just think in terms of the values. And there's honestly, there's not going to be a wrong answer here. There's definitely not a wrong answer. This is empowering you to respond with your feelings and tell stories that connect with your deepest values. So we'll just give it another minute and see you back in a couple. Okay, now. Okay, so there's still, okay, go ahead. I'm still gonna leave this open for a couple minutes here. So I can tell you, for those of you who are in the Madison area or southern Wisconsin, South Central Move to Amend is sponsoring a series of workshops to reframe the money in politics issue. And so on my website, on the workshop registration page, is the information to the workshops. They're both at the Madison Teachers Incorporated office. One is July 19th. That's a Sunday, and it's actually in the morning. It's from like 9 to 1, so nice and early. You can get the rest of your day free. And then the other one is August 23rd. And like I said, the information's on my website along with the registration. And there's only, I got an email from the organizer today, there's only about 8 spaces open. So if you know of anybody interested in money in politics, they are successive sessions. But I think if, most of you have a pretty good solid foundation in framing, so you wouldn't necessarily need the first session. So, okay. Lots of people have voted, almost everybody has, so I'm going to close the survey unless somebody chimes in and is in the middle of something. So, okay. So that poll is closed, and here we go. Let's see. We want to see results. Okay, so wait, I want to see the. Hold on, I want to pull up the actual. responses here. Okay, give me hold on a second. Results. Oh, here we go. Okay, so here's one response is, and I can actually share that. So I'm having difficulty getting my poll function to do what I wanted to. Okay, hold on. Results. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to have to read. Okay. So the first one, sorry about the difficulty there. I was having trouble popping between windows. Okay, so the first response is that referring to the presence of 100% job security as eliminating the incentive to perform at a high level plays on strict behaviorist model of motivation, which is very true, right? So the idea of incentivizing people plays on this combination of irrational fear and irrational motivation model. And how do you construct a new perception? This person is correct. It does not reflect what motivates people to do well. Again, we're talking systemic versus direct causation, right? So starting to evoke systemic causation through educating others is meeting a moral responsibility to the next generation. And the reward of mentoring to the younger generation serves to drive educators to perform at a high level. And that is perfect. Another person responded in terms of how we can construct a new perception through framing is business and individual prosperity depends on success of our public infrastructure, roads, water, sewers, internet, public education, and of course, college, the UW system. And again, this is a perfect place for all of you to put in examples, solid examples of that. The next person was talking about climate change. So the kind of reconstructive perception fitting the conservative frame, conservatives frame it by cherry-picking data that supports their denial that it is impacted by human action. They keep the frame on how addressing climate change would be sacrificial to the economy and market. They also say it would sacrifice the American way of life. That's a great example because they are rejecting facts that don't fit their frame, number one. The other thing that is really critical to pointing out is the idea of direct causation being false. That by making adjustments to our energy needs and addressing the systemic issue of climate change is something that would actually expand freedom for everyone. And it would not at all damage the economy and market, because again, this idea that we have to value something other than money. This idea that they keep the frame on economics. They keep the frame on economics and the market as the moral actor. It is spot on. So then how do we change that? So the idea that individual scientists are uplifting consequences we can't avoid. Very true. It's getting out of the business frame, the economic frame, and the economic market as a moral actor, and addressing these actual real changes that are happening, these systemic changes that are causing severe weather, and that brings it home to people. So that's a great idea. And then, the other comment that I would infer here is that the shortest route to undermining the conservative frame is the idea that the private depends on the public, or that private prosperity is not possible without the public. It is that if you think in terms of that, and think in terms of empathy and our responsibility to everyone in the community, if those are your two go-to ideas, I think you will be able to come up with really good ways to pivot the conversation in terms of how we have responsibility for others as ourselves, not just self-interest. So the final question I have, which is very easy, is that next week there will be a Thinking Points journal delivered, and I've opened up this poll because, believe me, it's not that I'm out of ideas by any stretch of the imagination, but this is a resource for all of you. So if there are local issues in your area, if there are specific things you would like to see addressed, or maybe a statement by a politician or something, feel free to fill out the short answer there. You can also just ask any general questions at this time, and I will send an email out when this is archived along with your new passwords for the month, because I'll be changing the password access before putting the archive up. So look for that. And feel free to, I'll leave this open for a bit. I'm going to stop the recording and turn off the audio and video, and I will share with you all by email when I send out the password what any suggestions you request for. So thank you all very much. Have a great night. Have a great weekend. And keep in touch by email or on the website. Thanks.